The Earl's Hidden Brother. Chapter 1. The Likeness. The rain over Derbyshire had a way of seeping into a man's bones, not so much a falling of water as a thickening of the very air itself. It crept under doors and through the smallest cracks in window frames. It turned the gravel paths to sucking mud, and it transformed the rolling hills into a vast, grey-green ocean of mist. It was this damp, clinging fog that Lucian Ashby, the 5th Earl of Ashford, watched from the vast, leaded glass windows of his library. The view was of the south lawn, a sweep of emerald green that dissolved into the grey, and beyond that, invisible now, the village of Thornwood with its little church and its huddle of cottages where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. He rarely ventured to the village. He rarely ventured beyond the iron gates of Ashford Park at all. At 32, the Earl was considered by the ton to be a ghost, a myth, a convenient title attached to a vast fortune, but devoid of a living, breathing occupant. The stories varied with each retelling. He was a cripple, hideously disfigured in some long-ago accident, his face a mask of scars that no servant was permitted to see, or he was simply mad, foaming at the mouth and chained to a bed in the farthest tower, locked away by a family ashamed of his lunacy. One particularly persistent rumour claimed he had murdered his own father and now lived in perpetual fear of discovery, a fugitive in his own ancestral home. The truth was far less dramatic, and in its own way, far sadder. Lucian was merely shy, not the charming self-deprecating shyness that could be mistaken for modesty in a young man, but a deep, visceral, paralysing terror of people. Their eyes, their expectations, their murmured conversations that he was certain, always, were about him. He could feel their gazes like physical weights pressing against his skin. In company, his throat would close, his palms would sweat, and his mind would go blank, leaving him standing there like a carved effigy of himself, while the world moved on without him. After his parents died, his father from a sudden apoplexy, his mother from a broken heart shortly after, he had simply stopped trying. The house became his fortress, his solitude his only comfort. A sharp rap on the library door made him flinch. He didn't turn. "Enter," he said, his voice quiet, as if unused to the effort. Pike, his butler, a man whose face was as impassive as the marble busts in the entrance hall, appeared in the reflection of the glass. "My lord, a situation has arisen in the stables." Lucian's shoulders, already tense, tightened further. "A situation? Is one of the horses unwell?" "No, my lord. It is one of the new stable hands. He was found in the tack room by Mr. Harris, the head groom. Mr. Harris is agitated." Pike paused, his expression unchanging, but his voice carrying a faint note of something unusual. Not alarm, precisely, something closer to wonder. "He insists you come at once." Lucian's first instinct was to refuse, to send Pike to handle it, to retreat further into his silent world of books and the ceaseless rain. But Pike had been with the family for 40 years. He had served Lucian's grandfather, his father, and now him. He did not summon the Earl for trivialities. With a sigh that seemed to cost him a great deal, Lucian turned from the window. "Very well." He followed Pike through the cavernous, silent house. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow him with disapproval. Here was the first Earl, a ruthless man who had clawed his way up from nothing during the Tudor court. Here was the 3rd Earl, a foppish creature in powdered wig who had gambled away half the fortune before dying of the pox. And here, at the turn of the staircase, was his father, the 4th Earl, captured in oils at the height of his power. Handsome, confident, cruel. Lucian always looked away when he passed this one. He pulled on a heavy greatcoat and stepped out into the wet, the gravel path to the stables crunching softly under his feet. The stables were a world away from the mausoleum-like quiet of the main house. Here there was the warm, earthy smell of hay and horse, the soft snuffling and stamping of the animals in their stalls, the cooing of pigeons in the rafters. But today There was a rigid tension in the air. A small knot of grooms stood near the entrance to the tack room, their faces a mixture of shock and barely suppressed gossip. At the centre of the knot was Harris, a weathered man with a brick-red face that was now a shade of puce. "My lord," Harris said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and something that looked very much like fear. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door of the tack room. "See for yourself." Lucian stepped forward, his brow furrowed. He had no idea what could so thoroughly disturb his staff. He peered into the small, lamp-lit room. It was neat, smelling of saddle soap and leather, with bridles hanging from pegs and rows of polished boots on a shelf. A young man was half standing, half crouching beside an upturned bucket of polish he had clearly knocked over in surprise. He was dressed in coarse, mud-stained breeches and a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, lean forearms covered in a fine dusting of dark hair. His hands, red and raw from work, were held out, palms open, in a gesture of placation. His dark hair was wet from the rain and curling against his forehead. His jaw was set, not in defiance but in confusion, as if he genuinely could not understand what crime he had committed. But it was his face that seized Lucian's breath and turned his blood to ice. He was looking into a mirror smudged with dirt and exhaustion, a mirror framed by dark, unruly hair instead of his own carefully combed locks, but a mirror nonetheless. The same shape of jaw, the same straight nose, the same set of the mouth. The eyes, wide with alarm, were the same shade of pale grey, the Ashford grey, his mother used to call it, the colour of winter storm clouds over the Derbyshire hills. It was his own face, staring back at him from the body of a common stable hand. The silence in the stable was absolute, broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof and the heavy thud of Lucian's own heart. "You see, my lord?" Harris whispered, his voice awestruck. "It's like seeing a ghost." The young man in the tack room looked from the Earl to the grooms, his expression shifting from fear to confusion to something like dawning understanding. "I don't understand," he said, his voice rougher than Lucian's, with the accent of the nearby countryside, not the polished tones of the gentry, but the honest vowels of a man who had spent his life working with his hands. "I ain't done nothing wrong. I just came to get the saddle soap. Harris sent me for it himself, not 10 minutes ago. Then everyone starts gawping at me like I've grown a second head." Lucian found his voice, though it came out as a dry croak. "Your name." The young man straightened up, a flicker of defiance in his grey eyes. He was not cowed by the Earl's presence, Lucian noted with surprise. Most people, even the most confident, wilted under his gaze, or rather, under the weight of who they thought he was. This man simply looked back at him, meeting his eyes directly. "Finn Rourke, my lord. Started Monday last. Harris hired me at the Michaelmas Fair in Thornwood. Said he needed another pair of hands before the winter set in." Rourke. The name meant nothing, but the face meant everything. Lucian became aware that every groom in the stable was watching them, their eyes darting from the Earl to the stable hand and back again. He felt the familiar pressure building in his chest, the urge to flee, to hide, to retreat to his library where no one could stare at him. But something kept him rooted to the spot, a fascination, a dread, a desperate need to understand. "Come with me," he said, and was surprised to find his voice steady. "Harris, send word to the house that I am not to be disturbed. The rest of you, return to your work. There will be no gossip about this. If I hear a single word of it repeated beyond these walls, the person responsible will find himself seeking employment elsewhere. Is that understood?" There was a murmured chorus of, "Yes, my lord," as the grooms scattered like leaves before the wind. Lucian gestured for Finn Rourke to follow him and led the way to a small sitting room attached to the stable manager's office, a room used for conducting business with horse traders and veterinarians, furnished with a sturdy desk and a few plain chairs. He closed the door behind them and stood for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Finn Rourke waited. He did not fidget or shift his weight from foot to foot. He simply stood there, his hands clasped loosely before him, his grey eyes watching Lucian with an expression of calm curiosity. It was, Lucian realised, exactly how he himself would stand in an unfamiliar situation, observant, patient, waiting for the other person to make the first move. "Sit down, please," Lucian said, taking the chair behind the desk. It felt wrong to sit while the other man stood. The stable hand was, in a very real sense, the one in command here. But old habits died hard, and the desk provided a welcome barrier between them. Finn sat. "I still don't understand what this is about, my lord. If it's about the Polish—" "It's not about the Polish." Lucian studied him, searching for any sign of deception, of artifice. There was none. The man was genuinely bewildered. "Mr. Rourke, have you ever been told that you bear a striking resemblance to someone?" A shadow passed over Finn's face. It was there and gone in an instant, but Lucian caught it. "People say I look like my father," Finn said carefully. "Or so I'm told. He's not the sort of man you'd want to resemble if you had the choice." "Your father, Thomas Rourke, the farrier." Finn's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know of him?" "I know he lives on the edge of my estate, in a cottage that belongs to me. I know he has a reputation for hard drinking and hard hands. I didn't know he had a son." Lucian paused. "A son who looks exactly like me." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finn's face went very still, all expression draining from it. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "I don't know what you're suggesting, my lord, but I'd thank you to remember that my mother was a good woman, married to my father for 30 years, until the day she died. If you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything," Lucian said gently. "I'm asking, thinking aloud, trying to understand something that makes no sense." He leaned forward, his pale hands clasped on the desk before him. "Mr. Rourke, my father, the previous Earl, was not a faithful husband. That is a matter of public record, though it was spoken of only in whispers. He kept a hunting lodge in Kent, and he spent a great deal of time there. A great deal of time. The year before I was born, he was there for nearly 9 months straight. My mother remained here, at Ashford Park, alone." Finn's jaw tightened. He understood now where this was leading. "Kent," he repeated. "I was born in Kent, a village called Little Breedon. And your mother's name was Mary?" "Mary Rourke, yes." Lucian reached into his coat and produced a small leather folder. He always carried it with him, though he rarely had occasion to use it. Inside was a miniature portrait of his father, painted when the 4th Earl was in his prime. He slid it across the desk. "Look at this." Finn picked it up. His hand, Lucian noticed, was perfectly steady. He studied the portrait for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Lucian, and for the first time there was something like pain in his grey eyes. "He has my nose," he said quietly. "My jaw. My—" He touched his own cheekbone. "This." "Look at me," Lucian said. "Really look. Tell me what you see." Finn obeyed. His gaze travelled over Lucian's face. The pale skin, the dark hair, the grey eyes, the shape of the brow, the line of the mouth. He saw it all, and Lucian watched him see it. The realization was like a physical blow. Finn's shoulders sagged slightly, and he set the miniature down on the desk with exaggerated care, as if it might shatter. "My mother never talked about it," he said slowly, "about how she met my father, my supposed father, about anything that happened before I was born. Whenever I asked, she'd go quiet and find something to do in the other room, and Thomas, the man I called father, he looked at me sometimes like I was a stranger, like he didn't know what to do with me." He swallowed hard. I thought it was just me. Thought I'd done something wrong somehow to make him hate me so. And Lucian felt a pang of something that might have been kinship. He knew that feeling, the conviction that one was fundamentally wrong, fundamentally unwanted, fundamentally alone. I think, he said carefully, that you did nothing wrong. I think you were simply born. And my father, for all his faults, must have felt some responsibility for you. Enough to find you a home, a name, a family. A family. Finn's laugh was short and bitter. Thomas Rourke is not a family. He's a brute and a drunkard. The only good thing in my life, the only good thing is my sister, Clara. She's 17. She looks after him, keeps the cottage from falling down around our ears, and he treats her like a servant, less than a servant. He looked up at Lucian, and there was a fire in his grey eyes now, a fierce protectiveness that transformed his face. If what you're suggesting is true, if I'm some byblow of your fine father, then I want nothing from you, nothing. But Clara, she deserves better than that life. She deserves a chance. Lucian sat back, struck by the intensity of the man before him. This was not a servant cringing before his master. This was a man who would fight for what was his, who would protect his own with every breath in his body. It was, Lucian thought with a strange pang of envy, exactly the sort of person he wished he could be. Then we must discover the truth, he said, properly, thoroughly. I have a solicitor in London, a discreet man, trustworthy. I'll send for him. He can go to Kent, make inquiries, find the records. Your mother's marriage, your birth, anything that might shed light on this. He paused. In the meantime, you cannot remain in the stables. The resemblance is too striking. The gossip has already begun. You'll come up to the house. You'll be given a room, proper clothing, a place at my table. Finn shook his head immediately. I can't do that. Why not? Because of Clara. If I leave the cottage, if I move into that house, she's alone with him. With Thomas, I won't do that. I won't abandon her. Lucian considered this. It was, he realized, the response of a good man, a better man than many he had known among the nobility, who abandoned their families without a second thought. Then she must come too, he said simply. There are dozens of rooms in the house. She can have her own, with a fire and a maid and whatever else she needs. Thomas Rourke will be compensated for the loss of your labour and his daughter's company. He will not argue, not if the price is right. Finn stared at him, his expression shifting from surprise to cautious hope to something like wonder. You'd do that? For a girl you've never met? I would do it for the truth, Lucian said, and for the chance to set right, if such a thing is possible, a wrong that was done before either of us was born. He stood, extending his hand across the desk. Will you let me try, Mr. Rourke? Will you let me bring your sister here, where she'll be safe, while we discover what really happened? Finn looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he took it, his grip firm and warm. I'll let you try, my lord. But if anything happens to her, if that man so much as raises his voice to her while we're gone, I'll hold you responsible. It was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. And Lucian, who had never inspired loyalty or protectiveness in anyone, found himself strangely moved by it. Understood, he said. Now, shall we go and fetch your sister? Chapter 2. The sister. The carriage that carried them to the edge of the estate was one of the Ashford Park conveyances, a closed landau, well-spring and comfortable, with the family crest emblazoned on the doors. Finn sat across from Lucian, feeling profoundly out of place on the velvet squabs. His rough clothing seemed almost offensive against such luxury, and he kept his hands carefully folded in his lap to avoid touching anything. Lucian sat in the corner, watching the rain-streaked landscape pass by. He had not spoken since they left the stables, and Finn had not pressed him. There was something about the Earl that discouraged idle chatter, not hauteur exactly, but a profound discomfort with the ordinary rhythms of conversation. Finn, who had spent his life reading people, reading his father's moods to avoid a beating, reading a horse's temper to avoid a kick, understood that the Earl was not being rude. He was simply afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of the 1,000 small social missteps that the rest of the world navigated without thinking. It was a strange thing to feel pity for an Earl, but Finn felt it nonetheless. The cottage came into view, a low, crumbling structure of grey stone, its thatch roof patched and sagging, its windows dark despite the early hour. Smoke rose from the chimney, but it was a thin, reluctant wisp, as if the fire within was struggling to survive. Finn's heart sank at the sight of it. He had lived here his whole life, and he had never seen it through a stranger's eyes before. Now, sitting in the Earl's luxurious carriage, he saw it for what it was, a hovel, a place of poverty and desperation, where hope went to die. The carriage stopped a respectful distance away, as Lucian had instructed. "I'll wait here," he said quietly. "This is a family matter. I have no right to intrude." Finn nodded, grateful for the delicacy. He climbed down from the carriage and walked through the rain to the cottage door. It opened before he could knock. Clara stood there, her grey eyes wide with alarm. She had clearly seen the carriage approach through the tiny window. "Finn, what's happened? Whose carriage is that? Are you in trouble?" The questions tumbled out of her in a rush, her small hands gripping his arms as if she feared he might disappear. "I'm not in trouble," he said gently. "At least I don't think so. Something's happened, Clara. Something strange. I need you to come with me, to come up to the big house. There's someone you need to meet." Clara's brow furrowed. The big house, the Earl's house. Why would we go there? She peered past him at the carriage, visible through the rain. "Is that his carriage? Is he in it?" "He is." Finn took a deep breath. "And Clara, he looks like me. He looks exactly like me. Like he could be my brother." He watched her process this information, saw the moment when understanding dawned. Her face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. "Your brother," she repeated slowly. "You mean, you think—" "I don't know what I think. But we're going to find out. He's sent for a solicitor, a man who can investigate, and he's offered us a place to stay, both of us, while we wait for the truth." He squeezed her hands. "A room of your own, Clara, with a fire and a maid and 3 meals a day, away from him." Her eyes flickered toward the interior of the cottage, where the sound of their father's snoring could be heard from the corner where he'd collapsed after his morning gin. "He'll never allow it. He won't have a choice. The Earl will compensate him. Enough money to keep him in drink for a year. He'll sign anything put in front of him." Finn tugged gently at her hands. "Come with me, Clara. Please. This is our chance, our only chance, to get out." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she nodded, once, decisively. "Wait here. I need to get my things." She disappeared inside, and Finn heard the soft sounds of her moving about, opening a drawer, folding cloth, the clink of her few precious possessions being gathered. A few minutes later, she emerged with a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She had put on her best shawl, the one their mother had knitted years ago, and pinned her hair back neatly. She looked, Finn thought with a surge of love, like a soldier preparing for battle. Together they walked to the carriage. Finn opened the door and helped Clara inside, then climbed in after her. She sat across from Lucian, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that would have made most men uncomfortable. Lucian, to his credit, bore it quietly, returning her gaze with one of his own. "You do look like him," Clara said at last. "It's remarkable, like looking at Finn in a fine suit of clothes." A ghost of a smile touched Lucian's lips. "I could say the same of you, Miss Rourke. You have the Ashford eyes. There's no mistaking them. Grey as winter storms. My mother's eyes were grey, Clara said quietly. I always thought I got them from her. Perhaps you did. Perhaps she had them from the beginning. Many country people do. Or perhaps... He stopped himself, unwilling to speculate further in front of her. Clara understood anyway. Or perhaps I got them from the same place Finn got his face. She looked at her brother, then back at the Earl. If what you're suggesting is true, if Finn is your father's son, then what does that make me? I'm only his half-sister. His father was Thomas Rourke, the man who married my mother when she was already carrying Finn. So I have no claim on anything. You have a claim on us, Lucian said simply, on Finn's loyalty, which is clearly absolute, and on whatever hospitality I can offer. Whatever blood runs in your veins, Miss Rourke, you are connected to this house now. You will always have a place here. Clara's eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away. That's very kind, my lord. But kindness from strangers, even strangers who look like my brother, is not something I'm accustomed to trusting. You're wise not to trust it, Lucian agreed. Trust nothing until we have proof. That's what the solicitor is for. The carriage rolled on through the rain, carrying them away from the crumbling cottage and toward the vast, silent house on the hill. Clara watched the landscape pass with wide eyes. She had never been this far from home before, had never seen the grand sweep of the park with its ancient oaks and carefully manicured lawns. When the house itself came into view, its grey stone walls rising against the grey sky like a castle from a fairy tale, she caught her breath. It's so big, she whispered. I didn't know anything could be so big. It's too big, Lucian said quietly. Too many rooms, too much silence. I've often thought it would be better as a ruin, something for poets to sigh over and painters to sketch. A living person rattling around in it is rather pathetic. Clara looked at him sharply, surprised by his honesty. Most people of his station would pretend to love their grand houses, would speak of them with pride and possession. This man spoke of his home as if it were a prison. She filed that observation away for later consideration. Pike met them at the door, his impassive face betraying no surprise at the arrival of two shabbily dressed strangers. He simply bowed and waited for instructions. These are Mr. Finn Rourke and his sister, Miss Clara Rourke, Lucian said. They will be staying with us for some time. Please prepare the blue room for Mr. Rourke and the yellow room for Miss Rourke. Have fires lit, hot water sent up, and arrange for appropriate clothing to be made. See to it immediately. Pike bowed again. Very good, my lord. Welcome to Ashford Park, he added, addressing the newcomers with perfect courtesy. If you will follow me, I'll show you to your rooms. They followed him through the cavernous entrance hall, up the sweeping staircase, along corridors lined with paintings and tapestries. Clara's head swiveled constantly, trying to take it all in. The gleaming floorboards, the crystal chandeliers, the vases of fresh flowers that appeared on every surface. It was like walking through a dream, a world so far removed from the damp cottage that it might have been another planet. Her room, when they reached it, took her breath away. It was done in soft yellows and creams, with a canopied bed draped in silk, a writing desk by the window, a fireplace already crackling with warmth, and a sitting area with cushioned chairs. A door led to a small dressing room, and beyond that, a private water closet, a luxury she had heard of but never imagined experiencing. There are clothes in the wardrobe, Pike said, gesturing to a massive carved piece of furniture. They belong to the late Countess, the Earl's mother. They may be somewhat old-fashioned, but they will serve until your own things can be made. Maggie will be up shortly to assist you. He bowed and withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Clara stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly in a circle, trying to absorb it all. Then, to her horror, she burst into tears. She hadn't cried in years, not since her mother died, not through all the years of her father's drunken rages and casual cruelties. She had learned early that tears accomplished nothing, that they only made things worse. But now, in this beautiful, warm, impossible room, the tears came unbidden and would not be stopped. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She wiped frantically at her face, but before she could compose herself, the door opened and a young woman peeked in. She was roughly Clara's age, with a round, friendly face and bright brown eyes. "Oh, miss," she exclaimed, taking in Clara's tear-stained cheeks. "Don't you fret now. It's all overwhelming, I know. First time I saw this place, I near fainted dead away." She bustled in, closing the door behind her. "I'm Maggie, miss. I'm to look after you. Now come sit by the fire and tell me what's wrong." Clara let herself be led to a chair, too worn out to protest. "Nothing's wrong," she managed. "That's the problem. Everything's right, too right. I don't know what to do with it." Maggie nodded wisely, as if this made perfect sense. "That's the way of it, when you've been used to hard times. The good times feel like a trap, like something's waiting to snatch it all away." She knelt by the fire and stirred it to greater life. "But it don't have to be that way, miss. Sometimes good things happen to good people. Sometimes the world rights itself. Just a little." Clara looked at her, this stranger who had been assigned to wait on her, and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost brought fresh tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being kind." Maggie smiled. "That's what I'm here for, miss. Now, shall we have a look at those clothes? The late Countess was a tiny thing, same as you. I reckon they'll fit a treat." Chapter 3. The Truth. The days that followed assumed a strange, dreamlike quality. Finn and Clara existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for news from London while simultaneously trying to navigate the bewildering reality of life at Ashford Park. Meals were served in a small dining room, just the three of them, with Pike hovering silently in the background, and Lucian would make halting conversation, asking about their childhoods, their mother, their life in the cottage. He seemed genuinely interested, genuinely moved by their stories of small joys and large sorrows. Clara, in particular, fascinated him. He watched her the way a naturalist might watch a rare bird, with intense, respectful curiosity. She, in turn, studied him with the same directness, asking him questions about his own childhood, his education, his life in the great house. She was not intimidated by his title or his wealth. She treated him as she treated everyone, with a straightforward honesty that seemed to both startle and delight him. "You're very brave," he said to her one evening, after she had described standing up to her father to protect Finn. "Braver than I could ever be." Clara shook her head. "It's not bravery when you have no choice. It's just survival. You do what you have to do, or you break." She looked at him with those clear grey eyes. "You survived too, my lord. In your own way. You built walls instead of weapons, but you survived." Lucian considered this. "I never thought of it that way. I thought I was simply weak." "Weak people don't last," Clara said firmly. "They fade away, or they give up. You're still here. That means you're stronger than you know." Finn watched this exchange with a mixture of amusement and wonder. He had always known Clara was remarkable, had depended on her remarkable nature to survive their childhood. But seeing her through Lucian's eyes, seeing the effect she had on this guarded, frightened man, was something new. She was like sunlight breaking through clouds, warming everything she touched. The letter from Mr. Thorne arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 10 days after Finn and Clara had come to Ashford Park. Lucian read it in silence, his face growing progressively paler. When he finished, he set it down on the library desk and looked at them with an expression of profound sorrow. "The truth," he said quietly, "as best as Mr. Thorne could determine it." He told them everything. The previous Earl's extended stay in Kent, his liaison with Mary, the farmer's daughter, the payment to Thomas Rourke, a substantial sum, carefully documented in the Earl's own ledgers, to marry the girl and claim the child as his own. The birth of Finn, recorded in the parish registry with Thomas Rourke listed as father, though the vicar at the time had noted in his private diary that the child bore a remarkable resemblance to the noble gentleman currently residing at the hunting lodge. 2 years later, the Earl's wife, Lucian's mother, had finally conceived. Lucian was born at Ashford Park, the legitimate heir, while his brother toiled in obscurity in a Kentish village, the son of a brutish farrier who had been paid to raise him. "My mother never knew," Lucian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was a good woman, gentle, kind. She would never have countenanced such a thing. My father must have hidden it from her, as he hid so much else." He looked at Finn. "You are my brother, my older brother. By rights, everything I have, this house, this title, this life, should be yours." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finn sat very still, his hands clasped on his knees, his face unreadable. Clara reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. After a long moment, Finn spoke. "I don't want it." Lucian blinked. "You don't? What?" "I don't want it." Finn's voice was firm, certain. "This life, it's not mine. I didn't grow up in it. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. You were raised to this, Lucian. You know the people, the responsibilities, the 1,000 small rules that govern this world. I'd be lost within a week." He shook his head. "No, I'm a stable hand. An estate manager, maybe, if you'll have me. That's who I am. That's who I want to be." Lucian stared at him, his grey eyes wide with disbelief. "But the law—" "The law can be managed," Clara said, echoing the words she would speak weeks later in a slightly different form. "If Finn refuses to press his claim, if we all agree to keep this between us, what is the law then? A truth with no one to speak it?" Lucian looked from one to the other, his expression shifting from disbelief to wonder, to something like hope. "You would do that? You would give up a title, a fortune, everything for me?" "I'm not giving up anything," Finn said. "I never had it to begin with. What I have, what I've always had, is my own 2 hands and the people I love. That's enough. That's more than enough." He glanced at Clara, who nodded her agreement. "But there's one condition." "Name it." "Clara stays here, with you. She's not going back to that cottage, not ever. Whatever arrangement we make, whatever story we tell the world, she has a place in this house. A real place. Not as a servant, not as a charity case, as family." Lucian looked at Clara, and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, a softening around the eyes, a loosening of the tight line of his mouth. But Finn caught it. He had spent his life reading people, and what he saw on Lucian's face now was unmistakable. His brother was falling in love with his sister. "Clara will always have a place here," Lucian said, his voice gentle. "Whatever she wants, whatever she needs, it's hers. That's not a condition. That's a promise." Clara's cheeks flushed pink, but she met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, my lord." "Lucian," he corrected her. "Please, if we're to be family, call me Lucian." Chapter 4. The Family. The months that followed were the happiest of Lucian's life. With the burden of his secret shared and, in a strange way, lightened, he found himself able to do things he had never imagined possible. He took walks in the garden with Clara, listening to her observations about the flowers and the birds and the way the light fell through the trees. He dined with Finn and Clara every evening, the conversation flowing more easily each time. He even ventured into the village once, walking beside Clara as she delivered baskets of food to the poorest families, a project she had initiated and which he had eagerly supported. The world, of course, had to be given a story. Mr. Thorne, that paragon of discretion, helped them craft it. Finn and Clara were distant cousins of the late Earl, discovered living in reduced circumstances and brought to Ashford Park out of family obligation. Their remarkable resemblance to Lucian was attributed to a shared great-grandfather, a harmless quirk of genetics that excited no particular comment. Those who might have wondered, the more observant servants, the occasional visitor, held their tongues either out of loyalty or because the truth was simply too improbable to credit. Finn threw himself into his new role as estate manager with characteristic energy. He rode out every morning to inspect the farms, the woods, the boundaries. He talked to the tenants in their own language, understanding their problems because he had lived similar ones. He instituted repairs, improved drainage, planted new orchards. The estate, which had been slowly declining under a succession of indifferent agents, began to thrive. And Finn, for the first time in his life, had work that he loved and people who respected him. Clara, meanwhile, transformed the house. Not physically, it remained the same vast, silent mausoleum it had always been, but spiritually. She filled it with laughter and conversation and the small domestic rituals that make a house a home. She learned to play the pianoforte that had sat untouched for decades, her stumbling scales and arpeggios echoing through the corridors like a declaration of life. She arranged flowers in every room, bright splashes of colour against the dark wood and faded silk. She coaxed the servants out of their habitual reserve, learning their names, their stories, their small joys and sorrows. Within 6 months, Ashford Park felt like a different place, still grand, still imposing, but no longer a tomb. And Lucian fell in love. It happened gradually, the way spring turns to summer. He would find himself looking forward to Clara's presence at meals, missing her on the rare occasions when she was occupied elsewhere. He would notice the way the light caught her hair, the way her laugh crinkled the corners of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. He would lie awake at night, composing conversations with her in his head, imagining what it would be like to hold her hand, to kiss her, to wake up beside her every morning. He told himself it was impossible. She was his brother's sister, or rather, his brother's half-sister, which made her nothing to him by blood. But she was also, in the eyes of the world, a distant cousin and a dependent. He was an Earl. The disparity in their stations was enormous. People would talk, would speculate, would assume the worst. But Clara, as always, saw through him. "You're thinking too much," she said one evening, when they were sitting together in the library. Finn had gone to bed early, exhausted after a long day of boundary disputes, leaving them alone together for the first time in weeks. "I can practically hear the gears turning in your head. What is it?" Lucian hesitated. Then, because he had never been able to lie to her, he told the truth. "I was thinking about you, about us, about whether—" He stopped, unable to continue. Clara set down her book. Her grey eyes, so like his own, were steady on his face. "Whether what?" "Whether it's possible," he whispered. "Whether you could ever, whether I have any right to hope." She rose from her chair and crossed the room to where he sat. She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. Those small, capable hands that had scrubbed floors and mended clothes and fought off despair for as long as she could remember. "Lucian," she said softly, "I have been waiting for you to say something. Anything. I thought perhaps I was imagining it, that you couldn't possibly feel the same way about someone like me." "Someone like you?" He stared at her. "Clara, you're the bravest, kindest, most wonderful person I've ever known. You've given me back my life. You've given me hope. How could I not love you?" Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away. "Then stop thinking," she said. "Stop worrying about what people will say, about stations and all the rest of it. Just be here, with me. That's all I want." He kissed her then, gently, reverently, as if she were made of spun glass. She kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised them both, her hands gripping his as if she feared he might disappear. When they finally drew apart, they were both trembling. "We'll have to tell Finn," Clara said, laughing a little unsteadily. "Tell me what?" Finn's voice came from the doorway. He stood there in his shirt sleeves, his dark hair rumpled from sleep, a knowing smile on his face. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd come down for a book. Instead, I find you two." He gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is." Lucian and Clara sprang apart, but Finn only laughed. "Don't stop on my account. I've been watching this happen for months, wondering when you'd both finally notice." "You knew?" Clara demanded. "I knew." Finn crossed the room and dropped into a chair, grinning at them. "I'm happy for you, both of you. You deserve this, deserve each other." He looked at Lucian. "You'll take care of her?" "With my life." "And you'll let him?" Finn asked Clara. "Let him fuss over you and protect you and probably drive you mad with his worrying?" Clara smiled, reaching for Lucian's hand. "I'll let him." Finn nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. When's the wedding?" The wedding was held in the village church on a bright June morning, the first truly warm day of the year. The church was decorated with flowers from the estate gardens, roses and lilies and delphiniums in shades of white and blue. The vicar, who had known Lucian since childhood and had long despaired of his reclusive ways, beamed throughout the ceremony. Pike stood in the back, his impassive face betraying nothing but a suspicious moisture in his eyes. Maggie, Clara's maid, sobbed openly throughout. Finn gave his sister away. As they walked down the aisle together, he leaned close and whispered, "You're doing the right thing. He's a good man. Better than he knows." "I know," Clara whispered back. "I've always known." After the ceremony, there was a small breakfast at the house, just the three of them, plus Pike and Maggie and a few of the older servants who had been with the family for decades. They ate and drank and laughed, and for the first time in his life, Lucian felt truly, completely happy. That evening, after the others had retired, he stood at the library window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Clara came up behind him and slipped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "Happy?" she asked. "More than I ever thought possible." He turned in her arms, drawing her close. "I used to think this house was a prison. Now it feels like a sanctuary, like home." "It was always a home," Clara said. "It just needed people in it. People who loved each other." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "Thank you for finding me, for seeing past the walls I'd built." "I didn't find you," she corrected gently. "Finn found you. I just followed." They stood together in the gathering darkness, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. In the stables, a horse stamped and snorted in its stall. And in the library, the Earl of Ashford held his wife in his arms and marvelled at the strange, winding path that had led him here. Upstairs, Finn sat at his window, looking out over the moonlit grounds. He thought of his mother, of the secret she had carried to her grave. He thought of Thomas Rourke, drinking alone in his crumbling cottage, paid to forget the son who was not his. He thought of Lucian, pale and frightened in the tack room, seeing his own face for the first time. And he thought of Clara, his fierce, loyal sister, who had found not just a home, but a love she had never dared to dream of. The truth had been hidden for over 30 years. It would remain hidden, for the most part, known only to the three of them and a discreet solicitor in London. But it had done its work. It had brought them together, forged them into a family, given them a future none of them could have imagined. Finn smiled into the darkness. Some secrets, he reflected, were worth keeping. Some truths were too precious to share with the world. Below him, the lights of Ashford Park glowed warm and golden against the night. His brother's house, his sister's home, his own place, at last, in the world. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end. My dear and gentle listeners, thus concludes our tale, for tonight. If you have walked these winding paths of devotion and doubt with us, if you have felt the hush of candlelit confessions and the tremor of guarded hearts at last laid bare, then you have my most sincere gratitude. It is no small thing to lend one's time and tender attention to a story. In an age as hurried as our own, such constancy is a rare and admirable virtue. I thank you for it most warmly. Should you wish to remain in our company, to wander further through moonlit gardens, stand witness to proud dukes undone, steadfast heroines revealed, and love that triumphs over pride and peril alike, I entreat you to subscribe and join our growing circle. By subscribing, you ensure that no whispered scandal, no long-buried